Hello, welcome to this series of lectures on spiritual science. The topicality of this series of lectures was once again evident a few weeks ago when the front page of a Dutch national paper read "Breakthroughs in science are becoming rarer," explaining that science has stalled, innovations are virtually non-existent, and complexity has made science more often a collaborative project. In these lectures we therefore hope to contribute to greater understanding, and we don't do that from and focused on spiritual science. You probably understand not science based on the study of material phenomena alone, but rather science based on the causes behind the material phenomena, which are of a non-material nature. And we are going to see to what extent modern scientists, in terms of the development of their mentality, are moving in the direction of that spiritual science. Today we will dwell on the universal science of antiquity. In the next lecture, we will look at the spiritual scientific side of physics. The lecture of today consists of the following three parts. Part 1, the universal science of antiquity, up to and including Pythagoras. Part 2, influences of universal science of antiquity up to and including the 18th century. And part 3, the application and the influence on science now in the 19th to 21st century. So here's part 1, universal science of antiquity up to and including Pythagoras. The first question is, what is universal science? And first, of course, we have to answer the question, what is science? Science focuses on the how of things, on finding truth, and science per se is ordered and classified knowledge based on research and experiments. How does science relate to philosophy and religion? Philosophy is also striving for truth, but focusing on the why of things. Religion focuses on the essence, on the what for of things. What then is universal science? Universal science has no strict distinction between the perspectives of science, philosophy and religion. In it, all issues are approached integrally. Let's look again at those three angles for considering truth. The scientific perspective, the how question, relies mainly on our intellectual thinking. It is predominant. The question you should always ask is something logical? Of great importance, distinction between the facts and the conclusions, for instance with respect to theories or hypotheses. The philosophical angle, the why question, relies mainly on our insight, on our understanding. Do we see the connections between everything correctly? If you understand the essence of something, you will always and everywhere be able to recognize it. So is something really universal? Then the religious perspective, the what for question, relies mainly on our awareness of the oneness of all life. From this results an ethical awareness of responsibility and compassion. So, is something ethical? Or, as one of the masters of wisdom put it practically, is science aimed at benefiting all humanity? And if so, then new knowledge will give infinitely beneficial effects. If therefore we are dealing with an approach that harmoniously considers both the how, the why, and the what for questions simultaneously, we can rightly say that we are dealing with universal science, which is also philosophical and religious. Hence, we also claim that time-honored Theosophia, as a synthesis of science, philosophy and religion, and as the core of all the world's great wisdom traditions, can also rightly be called a universal science. What kind of scientists can we distinguish in practice? Well, first of all, we see in the media science journalists who summarize, in fact, the ideas of others. Then we can also distinguish the applied scientists, the engineers, mainly applying science in a useful, practical way. Then we also have the academic research, the specialized scientists who focus on one specific subject. And finally, the exceptions, the universal scientists, who have a broad vision. For instance, Albert Einstein and Max Planck. In other words, they are quite rare, those universal scientists, but they are there and have always been there, as we will see. Before we look at scientists from classical antiquity, first a brief sketch of the Theosophia as a source and example par excellence of universal science. In all times, the Theosophia has represented the core of universal science, as reflected in the three universal propositions. The first one is about the boundlessness of life. Some implications of this fundamental proposition are that everything in the cosmos is alive or is consciousness. All life is interconnected and everything exists eternally. The second proposition is about cyclic motion. Everything pulsates and manifests cyclically. There is continuity of the life center, the spiritual core, the monad, the individuality of every individual being who is manifesting cyclically. And the third is the proposition about the hierarchical structure and the growth of every being. Nature is a hierarchy of living beings. Each life center is a top of the hierarchy and also part of a higher hierarchy. What is spirit or force and what is matter is relative. This depends on the point of view. Spirit or force and matter are one. And there are many hierarchies, many planes of spirit and matter. Then growth. Every monad is essentially boundless and has infinite potential for growth. The main schools of antiquity, the various traditions, were based on the idea of the boundlessness of life. And in the true mystery schools, the universe was always seen in this regard as embodied consciousness. Yet there were also thinkers and schools that did not strictly assume that and sometimes took a more materialistic view of the world. So when studying these ancient traditions, you have to be careful. If the source was a true mystery school, they assumed universal science, that is, a harmonious synthesis of science, philosophy and religion. However, there could also be a difference in emphasis for every mystery school. Take for instance Greece. The mystery school of Samothrace was more focused on science and ethics, while the mystery school of Eleusis was more focused on the mystical teachings. The idea of the boundlessness of life can be found, for example, under different names in the following traditions. In the Vedanta, it is called Tat. In Buddhism, Sunyata. In ancient Egypt, the one dark truth. In the Kabbalah, Ein Sof. In the Islam, Allah. With the Greek and with Plato, it was the idea of the good. Since Western culture is based to a large extent on classical Greek culture, we will put a lot of emphasis on that culture today. It is good to realize that many thinkers in antiquity knew something about the Theosophia because they were initiated in one or more of the mystery schools of that time. However, they were only allowed to teach about these truths in public writings in a veiled way, so usually through symbols or dialogues or hints. We can give now, with the fundamental thoughts of the Theosophia, those fragments and hints a place in our thinking. For many ancient Greek, too, the basic idea was that the cosmos is embodied consciousness. We always see ideas that can be related to one or more of the three propositions of the Theosophia. We will now review some of the Greek thinkers and their ideas in a historical order. But in advance, I want to apologize for my not so good pronunciation of the names of the ancient Greek philosophers and scientists. I'm not always completely aware of the difference in the English pronunciations compared to the Greek or Dutch pronunciation, and the main point remains, of course, what were the ideas of these philosophers and scientists. So here we go. We first start with the Ionic school. Thales, Anaximander and Anaximenes were members of that school. And as the origin of everything, those philosophers of the Ionian school considered matter, physis, as animated matter. Phy means growing, arising. Animated matter which carries power and growth potential. And according to this idea, spirit and matter are one. And our word physics in the English language comes from this Greek word physis. These thinkers were also called hylozoists, those who think that matter is alive. Thales, the philosopher, called water a principle, a primordial matter, because it expresses the abstraction of flowing. Everything is full of gods, he said. Anaximenes said that air is the animating principle of life. And with that, they both indicated the animated nature of everything. Anaximander saw the world as a hierarchy, as an arrangement, and called that cosmos. And that word means arrangement. Then we go to Heraclitus. Heraclitus argued that underlying all phenomena in nature is the principle of fire. And although the Ionian school and Heraclitus were all in the right direction, the picture of each was not entirely complete. Heraclitus looked mainly at the external world and saw the dynamics in it. Famous is his saying, "Pantarai," everything flows, nothing remains the same, even not for a moment. He said, "You cannot go into the river twice, because it will already be another river." So what the Ionian school and Heraclitus had in common is that they saw the world as a great progressive process. Nothing is, everything is becoming, a continuous process of growth. Then we move on to the Eleatic school with, amongst others, Parmenides. And they had the boundless as basis, because they did not seek it so much in the material world. And in this school, the one, the boundless, is precisely that which transcends the materially perceptible world. A spiritual truth which can be known through the mind. Parmenides thereby sought the ethics of the good, as Plato would later articulate it, the idea of the good. But the thinkers of the Eleatic school did see the whole as unchanging and static. Next we go to Pythagoras. Pythagoras understood philosophy as the wisdom of divine love instead of the more common translation of love for wisdom. And he did not consider himself a philosopher, but an inspiring student in wisdom of the divine love. Pythagoras taught the universal process of manifestation, the emanation process. And this applies to a cosmos, a sun, a human being, or an atom. The process of emanation or outflow involves that a guiding consciousness acts as a source being, for instance a sun. And that source being creates on a lower plane a sphere, an atmosphere, a force field emanating from its inner being, emanation. To that lower sphere, lower beings are being attracted. And these lower beings, in their turn, act again as a source being for even lower developed beings. And thus arises a spiritual hierarchy of life with different layers of existence. The doctrine of emanation and evolution and the doctrine of hierarchies, or how the one becomes the many, was given by Pythagoras by using the symbol of the Tetraktys. First, we see the highest and self-contained point, the source, the monad. Then comes the 2 points below, the duad. Then the triad, and finally the tetrad. And among others, it symbolizes the unwrapping of the 10 cosmic planes of nature, from the inner etheric planes to the outer material planes. Thus, the opposition of the worlds of spirit and substance is bridged in even steps or layers, as it were. The Pythagoreans also studied this harmony of even bridging in things like, for instance, music and mathematics. And they held the following scheme for the different cosmic planes and cosmic elements. We see 10 cosmic planes, the first 3, which are formless and universal and imperishable. Then the next 4 planes are planes of forms which are perishable. And finally the 3 planes which represent the elemental world. We see also the names of the cosmic elements. I've shown here only the Greek names, but there are equivalents for other traditions as well. And they have the following names from top to bottom. First the One, then Spirit, then Ether, Fire, Air, Water and Earth. Now from the emanation doctrine, they assumed for the solar system the heliocentric view, that is, with the sun in the center, instead of the geocentric view with the earth in the center. And this idea of the heliocentric view was long kept secret in the mystery schools. Regarding the forces in the cosmos, they assumed that forces have a consciousness side and are living entities, and have also a substance, a material side. And that is why forces have a particle nature and are flows of living particles. Well, this is the first part of the lecture. We will now have a break of 3 minutes in which you can prepare your questions, and then we will continue after this 3 minutes. See you then.